by Joshua Harris. In that place between wakefulness and dreams, I found myself in the room. There were no distinguishing features, save for the one wall covered with index card files. They were like the ones in libraries that list titles by author or subject in alphabetical order. But these files, which stretched from floor to ceiling and seemingly endless in either direction, had very different headings. As I drew near the wall of files, the first that caught my attention was one that read, "Boys I Have Liked." I opened it and began flipping through the cards. I quickly shut it, shocked to realize that I recognized the names on each one. And then, without being told, I knew exactly where I was. This lifeless room, with its small files, was a crude catalog system of my life. Here were written the actions of my every moment, big and small, in a detail my memory couldn't match. A sense of wonder and curiosity, coupled with horror, stirred within me as I began randomly opening the files and exploring their contents. Some brought joy and sweet memories. Others, a sense of shame and regret, so intense that I would look over my shoulder to see if anyone was watching. A file named Friends was next to one marked Friends I Have Betrayed. The titles ranged from the mundane to the outright weird. Books I have read, lies I have told, jokes I have laughed at, comfort I have given. Some were almost hilarious in their exactness. Things I've yelled at my brothers. Others I couldn't laugh at. Things I have done in my anger. Things I've muttered under my breath at my parents. I never ceased to be surprised by the contents. Sometimes there were more cards than I expected there to be. Other times there were fewer than I had hoped. I was overwhelmed by the sheer volume of the life I had lived. Could it be possible that in my 16 years, I had the time, I had the time to write all of these cards. But each card verified this truth. Each one was written in my own handwriting, each signed with my signature. When I pulled out a file marked Songs I Have Listened to, I realized that the files grew to contain their contents. The cards were packed tightly together, but yet, after 2 or 3 yards, I still hadn't found the end of the file. I closed it, ashamed, not so much by the quality of the music, but more by the fact that the vast amount of time I knew that file represented. Suddenly, I felt an almost animal rage. One thought dominated my mind. No one must ever see these cards. No one can ever see this room. I have to destroy them. In an insane frenzy, I yanked the file out. Its size didn't matter now. I had to empty it and burn the cards. But as I took the file at one end and began pounding it on the floor, I couldn't dislodge a single card. I became desperate and pulled out a card, only to find it as strong as steel when I tried to tear it. Defeated and utterly helpless, I returned the file to its slot. Leaning my forehead against the wall, I let out a long, self-pitying sigh. And then I saw it. The title bore People I Have Shared the Gospel With. The handle was brighter than those around it, newer, almost unused. I pulled on its handle, and a small box, not more than 3 inches long, fell into my hands. I could count the cards it contained on one hand. And then the tears came. I began to weep, sobs so deep that the hurt started in my stomach and shook through me. I fell on my knees and cried. I cried out of shame, from the overwhelming shame of it all. The rows of file shelves swirled in my tear-filled eyes. No one must ever, ever know of this room. I must lock it up and hide the key. But then, as I pushed the tears away, I saw him. No, please, not him, not here. Oh, anyone but Jesus. I watched helplessly as he began to open the files and read the cards. I couldn't bear to watch his response. And in the moments that I could bring myself to look at his face, I saw a sorrow deeper than my own. He seemed to intuitively go to the worst boxes. Why did he have to read every one? Finally, he turned and looked at me from across the room. He looked at me with pity in his eyes. But this was a pity that didn't anger me. I dropped my head and covered my face with my hands and began to cry again. He walked over and put his arm around me. He could have said so many things, but he didn't say a word. He just cried with me. Then he got up and walked back to the wall of files. Starting at one end of the room, he took out a file and, one by one, began to sign his name over mine on each card. "No!" I shouted, rushing at him. All I could find to say was, "No, no!" as I pulled the card from him. His name should not be on these cards. But there it was, written in red, crimson actually. So rich, so dark, so alive. The name of Jesus covered mine. It was written in his blood. He gently took the card back. He smiled a sad smile and continued to sign the cards. I don't think I'll ever understand how he did it so quickly. But in an instant, it seemed, I heard him close the last file and walk back to my side. He placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "It is finished."
Amen.
I stood up, and he led me out of the room. There was no lock on its door. There were still cards to be written.